Every railroad has its own colorful beginnings. For the White Pass and Yukon route, it was gold, discovered in 1896 by George Carmark and two First Nations companions, Skookum Jim and Dawson Charlie. The few flakes they found in Bonanza Creek in the Yukon barely filled a spent cartridge of a Winchester rifle. However, it was enough to trigger an incredible stampede for riches, the Yukon Gold Rush.
Claim for land to then and for gold. Now the valley that we're looking out has been nicknamed. You may have noticed that there's some lumber outside.
The 19th century was the era of railroad building, and an easier mode of transportation into the north was of interest to everyone. Two men appeared on the scene with essentially the same idea: build a railroad through White Pass. Sir Thomas Tengrade, representing the investors in London, and Michael J. Henry, an experienced railroad contractor interested in finding new work for his talents, joined forces. Tengrade had doubts that a railroad could ever be built through the coastal mountains, while Henry thought otherwise. "Give me enough dynamite and snooze," he bragged, "and I'll build a railway to hell." At no time during the construction period were fewer than 1,000 men employed, and the figure often reached 1,800 or even 2,000. They worked in relays through the summer when daylight hours lasted virtually around the clock. The White Pass and Yukon route climbs from sea level in Skagway to almost 3,000 feet at the summit in just 20 miles and features steep grades of almost 3.9%. The tight curves of the White Pass called for a narrow gauge railway. The rails were 3 feet apart on a 10-foot wide roadbed and meant lower construction cost. Building the 110 miles of track was a challenge in every way. Construction required cliff-hanging turns of 16 degrees, building 2 tunnels, and numerous bridges and trestles. Work on the tunnel at mile 16 took place in the dead of winter, with heavy snow and temperatures as low as minus 60 slowing the work. The workers reached the summit of White Pass on February 20th, 1899, and by July the 6th, 1899, construction reached Lake Bennett and the beginning of the river and lakes portion of the route. While one construction crew battled its way north laying rail, another crew came from the north heading south, and together they met in Carcross, Yukon on July the 29th, 1900, where the ceremonial golden spike was driven by Samuel H. Graves, the president of the railroad. "35,000 men worked on the construction of the railway, some for a day, others for a longer period, but all shared in the dream and the hardship." The $10 million project was the product of British financing, American engineering, and Canadian contracting. Tens of thousands of men and 450 tons of explosives overcame harsh and challenging climate and geography to create this wonder of steel and timber.